So this is a speaker meeting. Our speaker will share his experience, strength, and hope for approximately 45 minutes. We out of respect for our speaker to please remain seated until he has finished. It is my pleasure to introduce Sean.
So I wasn't nervous earlier, but I saw how you guys treated the first Nick, and you guys are animals. My name is Sean, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict. I was told earlier that I look like one, so that's cool. I said I love coming to AA meetings because this is the only place anywhere that you can refer to you people, and nobody's offended. So. My sobriety date is November 3rd of 2007, so I have a little over 13 years of sobriety. So I come from an alcoholic family. I was born in Wisconsin. I said I think I had the curse. I am Irish, Catholic, and from Wisconsin. So you'd have thought I'd maybe have thought through my whole drinking career a little better, but I was going to be good at it. I know I tried really hard. Like I said, I remember growing up thinking that going to the bar and getting drunk was like the greatest thing ever. I had my grandparents owned bars, so my whole family and everything we did was all about drinking. The first time I got drunk, I was 5 years old. My mom gave me grasshoppers. I've never had one since. But at 5 years old, I was drunk, and I do remember feeling fantastic. Like, it was the greatest feeling ever. I was having a blast. But I also remember that evening having a headache and feeling terrible. Like I said, I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father and my mother divorced when I was young, like 3 or 4, I think. And my mom remarried, and I was a latchkey kid. I was taking care of myself. Or at least being babysitted by my older brother and sister at a very young age. I remember knowing the bar's phone number by heart, which I think is a little weird. But past that, eventually my dad got sober, which was awesome. My dad's got 38 years of sobriety now, so my dad's a big part of my story. So I've been blessed that somebody was there to show me the way. Through all my shit, I knew there was an answer. I knew where you went. I knew where the clubhouse was. You guys told great stories. When I was in my younger years, I remember going to speaker meetings and listening to drunkalogs and thinking, these are fantastic. These people are hilarious. Like I said, the first time I got drunk, I was 5. The first time I smoked weed, I was 12. By the time I was in middle school, I was drinking as a light hobby. And I remember thinking as I was growing older, I just, like I said, couldn't wait to be able to drink like the adults. They were all having such a good time. Like I said, my family was a bunch of drunks, but they were a good time drunks. They didn't fight. They weren't a bunch of fighters. They were a very loud bunch of happy drunks. So I didn't see the harm in drinking. I couldn't see any of the harm in that. But like I said, when I was let me think about this. When I was 17, I moved out of the house. Before I graduated high school, there was some stuff with my parents that I ended up moving out and living my last half of my senior year with my sister. So I think I thought I was an adult at 17 years old. Little did I know. But one of my fond recollections of turning 21 was I remember the first time I walked into a bar and the bartender put a beer on the bar for me. Like, they greeted me when I walked in and they had that beer sitting there. And I remember walking up thinking, for me, I was home. I felt love. That's what that was for me. And like I said, those are things that just stick with me. Now, I had met my first wife when I was 19. I was under 21 anyways, but we partied and drank together all the time. We had a good time. Didn't have any kids. We were pretty busy traveling and just doing our thing and just having too good a time to slow down for children. We got married when we were 24, or I was 24. She was a little older than me. But we were having fun. I had gotten a job and was quite successful at my job. I'm a construction sales guy, so I'm kind of a professional bullshitter. But I think I felt like I just drank like everybody around me. I didn't drink. I didn't drink more than most of the people that I was around. In fact, I drank somewhat less than they did. Like I said, little did I know I was afflicted with the disease. I got my first DUI when I was about 27 years old. I neglected to say, my first time that I did cocaine, I was 17. And did it sporadically. I do it with my wife, and it was kind of a holiday thing for me. But the one thing that my ex-wife did, my wife did for me was, she was my governor. She was the person that would tell me to slow down drinking, or, don't smoke cocaine, don't do all this shit. Of course, I resented her for it, because, she was a bitch. But I got my first DUI. Now, for me, my first DUI, it almost felt like a rite of passage, because everybody I knew had one already. But I got one, and I remember feeling terribly guilty. I had basically taken a company truck and drove it into a farm field. I was very fortunate. At the time, I didn't feel this way, but I was fortunate. I hit a telephone pole in the middle of the cornfield. And she came and picked me up and took me back home, and a couple hours later, the cops showed up at my house and arrested me for DUI. Now, one of the things that came out of that was it's the first time that I tried to quit drinking. I'd never tried to quit drinking before. There was no point in it. Why would I? So I committed to, I think, quitting drinking for a month. Yeah. I think I lasted 5 days, 6 days, something like that. I just remember thinking, fuck this, I'm not doing this. Why? Well, this is dumb. But one of the other things that came out of that is the first weekend that I was supposed to be sober, I decided, well, if I can't drink, then I'm going to get some Coke, because at least I'm going to have a good time. Well, I found a dealer. That was terrible. That was just terrible. At the time, it seemed terrible. Right now, in hindsight, I look at all this stuff as very much a blessing. But yeah, so I found myself a dealer. So I was on to the cocaine train. I always said I didn't really like cocaine that much. I just liked the smell of it. But so I unsuccessfully tried to quit drinking for a little while. I now had a cocaine dealer, and I started doing it on a regular basis. Shortly after that, maybe a couple of years after that, I tried crack cocaine for the first time. Now, that was a completely different experience. Now, what I thought I was going to do with cocaine is exactly what I did with alcohol, which was I did it more than most, but it wasn't that big a deal. I was terribly mistaken. That is not how it worked. So needless to say, in a very, very short time frame, I trashed my career. I destroyed my marriage. I was lying to everybody about everything, and it all caught up to me. And so my solution to that problem is one, I decided I needed a divorce. However, I believe I probably shouldn't have been married to that fine woman any longer. She probably didn't deserve my bullshit. However, I'm not alone in that relationship, so it's not all my fault. But I do take responsibility for my part in it, and there was a lot of it. So with that being said, I did also lose my job, and when I lost my job, I was terribly indignant to my boss. I was so manipulative that when he fired me, and he was so kind as to, I call it my quit fire, because he put out a memo to all my customers that I quit, and that I was going to go work for somebody else. And he was shit-canning me. It was really nice for me and made me feel like it wasn't quite what it was. Because like I said, I came up with a name for it. Quit fire? No, you got fucking fired. Sorry. But so I got fired, but when he told me this, the man respected and loved me. I had worked for him since I was 19 years old, and now I'm in my 30s, and he just looked at me and he had tears in his eyes, and he's like, I'm sorry I have to do this. And I said, yeah, well, I guess you don't understand what it's like to go through a divorce. I'm like, I am making shitty decisions, and I'm blaming everybody but myself for all of this. So the good thing that had happened after this is this nice woman that was my wife decided to not give up on me, and she asked me if I would be willing to go to treatment. So she helped me find Nova Treatment Center. It's a treatment center in Wisconsin. I am so grateful for her for finding that place, But I remember how defeated I felt when I finally had to just go, yep, I got to go to rehab. I'm like, I just can't believe I got to go to rehab. This is terrible. So you can imagine my trip to rehab, and I'm going to say it this way, my first trip to rehab, I went because I wanted the shit to stop. I was destroying everything in my life, so I decided, all right, I'm going to go to rehab. I'm doing 28 days. This is going to be great. Well, it was a nice 28-day break. I just didn't, I had heard my dad's sobriety so much that I had learned how to just repeat stuff. So, yeah, I knew all of the acceptance and let it go and, you know, one day at a time and all that stuff. And at the time, I just wasn't practicing it. I was there to save my face still, you know. I don't think I was quite at the point where I was ready to save my ass. So I went there. I got my 28 days there. While there, they said, hey, you should go to a halfway house. And I'm like, huh? I'm not going to a halfway house. At this point, I'm 34 years old. I do not need a babysitter. Turns out they were right. Because about a week out of rehab, I relapsed. I like telling this story because I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. I have the affliction. I've got a disease. I relapsed on a Whippet can. There was a whipped cream can in my refrigerator, and that's how I relapsed. So, yeah. And just to show kind of where my illness was at the time, about a week later, I started smoking crack again. But I didn't drink a beer for like 4 months. And I'm pretty sure somewhere in there, I'm pretty sure I got a 2-year chip, or 2-month chip. So, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready at all. So, like I said, I was now out of rehab. I was relapsed, and I was getting where I was close to getting finalized on my divorce. I got my 401k, which, by the way, don't cash out your 401ks ever, because you might, I'm just saying maybe, 13 plus years later be making payments to the IRS for the tax penalties. Just maybe. So, just a word to the wise. But yeah, so I was on the run, man. I just was like, I am on fire. I went and got myself this bitchin' apartment and started hanging around with some really, really sketchy people. And like I said, there were gangsters and dirty girls everywhere. It was terrible. And so that whole thing went on for a while. And I ended up getting a second DUI. The second DUI, things were getting worse. And it was very nice because by this time, my ex-wife bailed me out of jail. And asked me, like, when are you going to go back to rehab? I'm like, not tonight. You know, like, I'm going back out and partying some more. It was terrible. But I also got charged with 6 counts of felony forgery. So, yeah, so shit was starting to get worse. And it was getting real. All of a sudden, felony charges are not DUIs, not where I'm from. So all of a sudden, I'm looking at some serious shit that I'm in. And I'm sitting in my house one day, and I walked into the bathroom, and this is something that happened, and it's never happened since, and it had never happened prior. But I looked at myself in the mirror and got this, it was my moment of clarity. I looked at myself in a way that I'd never seen myself before. I was looking at someone else in that mirror. And it was so hard. I was disgusting and sad, and it was scary. But in my alcoholism, I just looked at myself and went, wow, you were fucked up. I went back out and partied some more. Fortunately for me, at this point, I'd had enough program because of the rehab that it was starting to pop in my head that things were becoming really ugly and really unmanageable. So one day, a gentleman that I have known since I was in 2nd grade came to my house, and he partied with me all the time. But he comes up to me and says, hey, so I talked to your family, and I told him I'm going to tell you this, but I got to ask, when is this going to stop? And I don't know what happened, but I was struck willing. I said, tomorrow. I'll call the rehab tomorrow. And that's actually what happened, because most of the time my tomorrows turned into some way other date. But I went and partied, and that next morning I got up and I called Nova again. And I got myself into rehab. And that was November 3rd of 2007. They required 2 days to be sober before you got there. And the woman I was dating at the time, who was just as big a mess as I was, felt like it was time to help me be sober for a couple of days. And let me tell you, that actually created a few fights that couple of days. But I got to Nova sober again. But this time they asked me, okay, so what's going to be different this time than it was the last time? Well, when I walked in, I went to the counselor and I said, look, I commit to going to a halfway house. For me, the second time through rehab was like, look, I can't pretend I'm not exactly the person that needs to be here. I need help. I need to be here. So I decided that A, I would go to a halfway house, and B, that I would try to do it the way they told me to do it. I was going to give it an honest effort. And it was profound. The difference was amazing. A couple of days in, I remember walking up to a coffee pot, and it was empty. And I was like, God damn it, why don't these people make coffee when they empty the pot? And it popped in my head right at that moment that, why do I think my way of thinking is correct? Obviously, there's something not quite right with me. I need to start realizing that I don't know better. So that was a significant difference. One other thing that happened was very shortly after I was at a meeting. And I had always had the question of like, have I hit my bottom? What is my bottom? I'd heard jails, institutions, and death. But here I am in rehab. Is this it for me, or what's going on? And it was amazing because, and I'm sure we've all had this experience, I'm sitting in a meeting and all of a sudden some guy pipes up and says, well, I've been considering about if I've hit my bottom yet. And that got my attention. And he says, so I decided to drop the shovel. But the shovel's still sitting there, so if I want to pick it up, I can. And that was profound for me. That was huge. I was like, no shit. Like, okay, I can do that. This can be my bottom if I want it to be. And like I said, moments like that have happened so many times in meetings for me that I have a really hard time doubting the existence of my higher power. I love seeing it work in other people, and I'm always fascinated when it works for me because God's timing is always right on time. So I decided that I was going to, 3 weeks in, they started hitting me up about halfway houses, and I had a plan. I was going to go to the Chris Farley house in Madison. That's where I'm from. And so I was going to go to the Chris Farley house, and I was going to get a job kind of close to where I used to work, and I had this plan. That is not God's plan for me. I called them up, and they were like, 8 weeks is our waiting list. I'm like, 8 weeks? I can't do 8 weeks. I couldn't do like a week last time. I'm certain I can't do 8 weeks. So I'm like, all right, let's find a different place. So in some podunk town in Wisconsin, I'm like, all right, I'll go there. I guess I'm willing. And they tell me the same thing, 6 to 8 weeks. I'm like, I just can't do this. I need help. At this point, at least I want to make the effort. So I try one other place, same result. And now I'm starting to get a little panicky. I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. I can't do this on my own. So my counselor turns to me and says, hey, what do you say you go out to Arizona? And I'm like, sure, what the hell? Like, at this point, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm just going to do what somebody tells me. I'm like, okay. He goes, check with your lawyer, because I still have the second DUI and that forgery case hanging over my head. He goes, check with your lawyer, see if it's cool. I talked to my lawyer. He says, yeah, if you can come back in 2 weeks, go. He goes, I'd love to see you sober, because my lawyer saw me in some pretty fucked up spots, and he was a family friend. So I went to Arizona. I had no idea where Prescott, Arizona was. I think Arizona, I've never been to Arizona. I think Arizona is the Roadrunner cartoon. So that's where I think I'm going. I also didn't know anything about Chapter 5, which is where I went. Did you know Chapter 5 at the time had this really cute website picture of this really neat looking little cottage. It had like 2 chairs and a table, and I'm like, cool. It's going to be 2 guys to a room. It'd be like a cool cottage. Well, this is going to be great. Let me tell you, that is not what it was. Not even a little bit. I walked in the first day, and it's 6 guys in a room. I'm like, what? We got 6 guys here? We're going to sleep bunk beds and shit? But I was in the good room, because the bad room was the one that had 8 guys in it. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I came here, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like I said, I guess I was as willing as only the dying can be, you know? So I was willing to try this. And like, I was to a point that I didn't know I had to buy my own food. Fortunately, I didn't come out here broke. I was almost broke. I'd almost spent all the money I had. I had enough left to pay my rent and buy some food for a while. And at some point, I had to start thinking about getting a job out here. And it was hard to find it. Well, I'm sure it probably still is hard to get a job in Prescott. There's a lot of rehab guys looking for, shitty paying gigs. Like, what are we qualified to do? Not much. I'm going to have to at least prove myself. So, actually, one great thing about this room, I still remember one day before I got my job, I was standing out in the parking lot talking to a couple guys smoking a cigarette and said, hey, God, I need to get a job, man. And they're like, yeah, we're all looking. And we sit down in the meeting. And this woman that was in here, I'm guessing she was in her 70s. But she starts telling a story. And she goes, yeah, I remember when I first got sober. I was telling my sponsor that I needed to get a job. And I'm like, what? This is happening again, I'm like, what the hell? And all of a sudden she goes, well, my sponsor turned and told me that maybe God's not ready for you to have a job. And I'm like, okay. So this place, this room, this is also the room that I got my 1-year chip in. So I have great memories of being in here. And I do remember being in here with just a couple of days, or a couple of months, I suppose, because I had 30 when I got here. And just thinking that I can't believe I had gotten myself here. I mean, with all due, I was like, God damn it. I'm in giant meetings with piles of rehab kids. This is just, I have fucked my life up. Now, I would tell you that is not how I felt for very long, because at some point I just started thinking, you know what, I'm at home. I was so comfortable with people like me. I made some really great bonds and friendships at Chapter 5. But I have to tell you, one of the most profound things happened. I was there maybe a week. And I'm reading my big book, and I'm doing my thing. And I'm going to read a section out of the big book because it's really, really meaningful to me. And then I'll tell you a little bit of a story afterwards. So it's page 25 in the big book. And it says, there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We had found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. If you were as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life had become impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. So I read that, and it was a revelation for me. It was amazing. There was two things that came of that. One is I like to paraphrase and say, if you were seriously fucked up as I am, you had two choices, death or this. But I picked that, I read that, and I called my dad. And my dad at the time had, he had 20 plus years, 25 plus years of sobriety. And I called him and I was like, Dad, you're not going to believe what I just read. And I read it to him. And he goes, son, I think you got it. I think you got your higher power. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that was a big deal. I mean, to get a little bit of praise from somebody who'd been sober for a long time that I admired was a big deal. But the biggest part of it for me is that I realized that this book is for me. I'm an alcoholic. Like, there was no more just saying it because everybody says it in a meeting. It was no more of an introduction. It was fundamentally, I had realized that I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. And this was my solution, and it works. I know it works. So that was a big deal for me. Now, I went to tons and tons of meetings because, like I said, I didn't have a job. I was going to 3 and 4 meetings a day, man. I got nothing better to do. And I'm kind of glad that I was a little bit older, that I was in my 30s, because I wasn't 20. I wasn't trying to cause havoc. I wasn't raising hell. I was just trying to get sober. So I went to meetings, and I got something out of them, a lot of them. Some of them I just sat and stared at good-looking women across the room. Hey, man, I made all kind, and I still do. I make all kinds of dumb decisions, and because I'm sober doesn't make me infallible. So I did go to every meeting. I went to CHIP meetings that would give you the in-between months because I needed 1, 2, 3, 4. I needed 30 days at a time. That's what I was living for. I was doing it a day at a time, but to give myself the reward that I felt I needed, I really needed to have some goal. And I loved going to the next meeting and getting that next chip. I've got all of those sitting in a box at home. And every so often, I'll pull it down off the shelf and look through them and just, I don't know, man. All I know is when I finally got my big heavy metal chip, that was a fucking thing. That was awesome. But I'll tell you what, and I still carry my 24-hour tin chip everywhere. Because I got to remember, this is how I do it. I get this because of this. So I had to go back when I was, I was about 40 days sober. I had to go back and do my time for my DUI. I had to go spend a week in jail. So, first time I've ever been in jail in my whole life. I'm sober. I'm like, this somehow isn't seeming like how it was supposed to go. But I went and did what I was supposed to do, and I came back here. And then about 2 months later, I had to do it again, this time for the forgery stuff. This time I had to go back and just face the court date. And that could have been a pretty bad thing. And I was reminded by some people in the rooms that what you need to do is just pray that God let you be okay with whatever the outcome is. And that's what I had to do. And fortunately for me, because I was out here and I sat in open court and told him that I had, 60 plus days of sobriety, the judge patted me on the back, said, look, probation between states is a pain in the ass. Here's your fine. Get out of here. So I got to come back out here. And it was awesome. But like I said, I had to go face I had to face my crimes. But so when I got back here, I finally did get a job. I got a job at Granite Gate. It's a retirement center out in the Dells. And I served food to elderly people. I'd never worked in the foods. I worked at Taco John's when I had a high school job, but I'd never been in the restaurant business. I didn't know what I was doing. But I'll tell you what, I went from making 6 figures a year as this great construction guy that I thought I was to $7.25 an hour. And what I learned at $7.25 an hour is humility. And I also learned that being a worker among workers is a thing. Show up and do your thing. Just show up and work. Do your best. And to be able to help elderly people was something that was so gratifying. I couldn't believe I was having this really cool experience. And one of the byproducts of that is eventually I worked my way up in that company. I ended up managing the dining room, and then I ended up being what they call the resident services director. All of a sudden I got 45 people under me, and I'm like, wow. Okay, so what I realized is I didn't luck my way into my success. Prior to this, I was now showing myself that I was a decent human being, no matter what my internal conversations were. So I was also at about, let's try to think about timing on this. I think it was, sorry, I'm trying to remember this. Okay, so it was a little short of 6 months of sobriety. Chapter 5 asked me to go into transitional, which is just a sober living apartment. A lot less requirements and shit. Now, I had kind of a plan that I was going to leave at 6 months, and I was done with Prescott, and I was done with halfway house and the whole deal. And I talked to my brother, and I asked him if I could come stay with him. He said yes. So I went and talked to my brother on the phone, and he was happy to have me, but he said, let me ask you one question before you hang up. Are you sure that you want to come back home? He goes, I'd love to have you. He goes, I miss you. But whatever you're doing out there has gotten you almost 7 months of sobriety. You might want to think that through. And I'm like, all right. And I actually did. I went to my sponsor. I talked to some friends about it. And lo and behold, I realized that, I don't need to go back to Wisconsin. What I need to do is continue to be sober. And what got me sober was being here, doing the things I'd done. I was so used to finding spots in my life to go, you know what, I got to change things. I got to do something different. But this was the first thing that I ever decided, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. It's working. So that was a big deal. I then was very blessed to meet my lovely wife who's with me tonight. That's a God thing, man. I'm telling you. Lori doesn't drink. She's not one of us, but she don't drink. So I don't know how that happened exactly, but I sure hit the jackpot. Beautiful and sober. I also in that time worked my steps. And the thing that struck me about working my steps was I put it off as long as I could. I'd done that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 for 7, 8 months. And I finally got with somebody who had me put pen to paper, and I worked my steps. And when I did, my 4th and 5th, I was struck with the amount of selfishness that shows in that for me. For me, I was like, holy shit. I don't think I'd ever written me and I so many times in a short period of time, ever. So I got to start to realize that I have to take responsibility for my life and my actions. And I need to apologize when necessary and when appropriate. I got to take responsibility for that stuff. And I'll tell you what, as a sober man today, there are times that I don't want to say I'm sorry. I don't want to tell somebody that I was bullshit, that I was lying. But I'll tell you what, it's kept me sober. And most of the time, no, every time for me, it's the people looked at me and went, what? Well, I'm so glad you're telling me this. And the relationship changes. It makes a bond. It's been such a beneficial thing in a lot of, because it comes into work on a fair share of times. I've had to call people. One time I tried to call somebody on a Saturday to apologize because I figured I was going to backdoor him. He answered. And I'm like, hey, why are you fucking answering on a Saturday? And he's like, well, you know me. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So I had to go through the spiel with him. But I'll tell you what, when I hung up with him, and then the reason I did it was because I was sitting at a breakfast with a bunch of guys after a meeting on Saturday morning, and they go, you know what you need to do, right? And I'm like, yeah, I hate you guys. I hate when you guys tell me that I should do stuff, because you know what? You're right. I have to take the action, because it's action and more action. It always is, man. So one of the things that I did want to comment on is relationships and early sobriety. Don't do it. Ask that lady. What's it like to date a crazy person? Yeah, somewhere in it, I broke my gut instinct. I don't know when that happened, but it was when I was using and drinking. I was trusting people I shouldn't. I wasn't trusting people I should. I was a mess. And I got sober, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know how to do life. I had no idea if my thinking was correct or not. I was a mess. And I took it out on people around me, and thank God she stuck around and put up with it, because I was tough. I know internally it was rough. I want to share with you one of the early prayers that I said when I first got sober. I always said that there's no original thoughts in AA, everything somebody else said. So somebody told me at one point to say, thank you, God, for everything you've given me, everything you've taken away, and everything that's left. Because that's all I got. And that's the connection I could make. I understood I had a higher power. I just hadn't had anybody really help me figure out how to pray. Because for what it's worth, it's in the book. Read it. They tell you to pray. And they tell you to not pray for selfish ends. You have to pray for others. Sometimes those are for people you like, and sometimes it's for people you don't. Sometimes I got to pray for people that I cannot stand. I'm telling you, I actually heard it in my second trip to rehab. This old lady standing up front, and she goes, well, sometimes you got to pray for the fucker. And then sometimes you got to pray for the fucky. So that was helpful for me. But I will tell you this. I'm going to make sure that you all understand that you can make bad decisions in sobriety. Just because you're sober does not make you infallible. It's not going to make your decisions better if they're shitty. Shitty is shitty. Run everything through your sponsor, especially in early sobriety. Because for me, I believe at 6 months sober, I drove my truck and my motorcycle back from Wisconsin to here because I needed them. I didn't have a driver's license. Now, I don't know exactly why my family just said, I think they were just sick of me and were like, good, go back, I don't care. But yeah, I had convinced myself and people around me that because I didn't have a driver's license in Wisconsin, that wasn't the same as, I don't know what the fuck I was doing. I got an idea. I was manipulating people like I did. So this is, like I said, like 6 months sober. So it turns out that the day before my 1 year sober, it was a Sunday, I decided that I was going to get on my motorcycle and ride down the Spars. I love riding my motorcycle. It was so freeing. Not that day, because on the way back, I got pulled over by a nice DPS officer who decided that since I didn't have a driver's license, insurance, or registration, that I should go to jail. Now, he's very nice as he's checking me in. He goes, this is weird. I feel really bad because, you seem like a really nice guy. I really don't want to have to put you in jail. And I'm like, yeah. You know, I don't know. I was pissed, but realizing that I had done this to myself. For the record, I went to jail for the second time in sobriety. And now, if you don't recall, I told you I'd never been in jail when I was getting high. So I'm just saying, bad decisions are bad decisions. And it was such a good experience for me. I had some loving friends that bailed me out and told me, hey, stop driving without a driver's license. We'll drive you around everywhere you need to go. And they took me back and forth to work, and they took me to meetings. They were wonderful. They just loved me right to where I needed to be. So I'm just saying that I make bad decisions still. Fortunately, they seem to not involve legal things nowadays. They're generally just me running my mouth. So in sobriety, I have gone through job changes. I lost my mother. My mother passed away when I was a couple of years sober. I was very happy that she got to come out and spend some time with me out here and see what my sober life looked like. But she died an alcoholic death. You know, she died, I think, officially of COPD, but she was in terrible health. She'd never taken care of herself. Drugs, alcohol were the end of her. So I went through that, and the thing that for me is I was always really afraid that I wouldn't be able to stay sober through the loss of a parent. Turns out I can, because instead of turning away from my program, I turned in, which for me was like an awesome revelation. I was like, holy shit, I'm still using the tools that I've been given. Like I said, hey, there ain't anybody that's more surprised that I'm still sober than me, because I just show up every day. I just get up. I get up, and I try not to drink. That's my thing. But, so I went through that. I went through Lori's breast cancer. She went through chemo. She had a double mastectomy. And it was an amazing experience. I learned so much about who and what I have become. Because it's one thing to tell people, I love you, I'll do anything you need, I will always be here for you, I will love you through everything. Those are the words I've said to Lori 1,000 times prior to that. For a 1.5 span of time, I got to prove that to her. And I walked away from that experience, and I'll tell you what, I came into meetings and said, fuck cancer, and I hate having to do all this shit, and this is fucked up. And all you guys love me, and you were there for me, and you helped me, and people related their experiences with these kind of situations. And I'm telling you, I couldn't have gotten through that stuff without you guys and this program and my higher power. So, like I said, I've learned so much from being here. I've been through so many things, and have yet to pick up. And it's, I like the phrase, I got a lot of get-tos. You know, I like to run. It's one of my hobbies. I run 3 or 4 times a week. And for what it's worth, I hate running. Running sucks. But I do it because you know what? I get to. You know, there's a lot of times where I'm running along, and my brother one time said, when you run, you should smile. I must look like a mental case running down. So, so I do. I got a lot of get-tos today. When I was a couple years sober, I had a gentleman that was my sponsor. I was telling you about the prayer being in the book. He gave me a prayer routine. It's a meditation and prayer. So I read out of my big book and I pray. And I do that every morning. And all I know is this, is when he gave it to me, he's like, I promise you your life will get better. And I was like, bullshit. Because at 2 years sober, everything was awesome. I mean, I had Lori and I had stepkids and I had these loving relationships and I was still fucking sober. It's just like, it's a miracle. But I'll be goddamned if he wasn't right. I did that and it got better. But I'll tell you what, the secret that he knew, he'd been sober for 20 plus years, is that it always gets better. If you keep working this program, it keeps getting better. I don't know how that's possible. I figure at some point I might just explode. That's the only thing I can figure that this ends in. You know, nothing like a life well lived. So I have a home group. I do less meetings today than I used to. I live down in Phoenix and I work up here. So, but like I said, every day I have my daily routine. There's not a day that goes by that I don't work my program, that I don't work my sobriety. I do a lot of service work. There's a meeting in town here that I think I did coffee for 5 or 6 years, something like that. until my dad told me I had to give it up because somebody else probably needed that service commitment. So, but I was kind of, in my typical way of being, I was kind of taking the easy way out because showing up at a meeting a little early and making coffee is about the easiest service commitment you can do. So I have actually run my meeting that I go to down in Anthem now for a while, and I had to give that one up too because I'd done it long enough. But one of the things that I always I want to make sure that I tell anybody that's in newer sobriety, you know that anxiety that you feel, that perpetual fucking whatever that is that you feel, it goes away. I promise you, if you stick around long enough, it goes away. It just goes away. I don't know when it happens, but for me, it was around the year mark. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, life wasn't like getting and staying sober at first is such a fucking grind. It's so hard. It's everything, but it's worth it. I can promise you it is absolutely worth it, and that feeling goes away. Because eventually, it's not about staying sober as much as it is about living sober. Because after you haven't drank and used in a while, it kind of becomes a bit of a reflex. It becomes your state of being. It's not without temptation, don't get me wrong, but it certainly becomes a lot easier. So I just want to assure you that that goes away. I've had some people telling me, I had a gentleman first tell me that one of the pressures that we put on ourselves in sobriety is that we should be better, we should be more sober, we should be at some other level that we've given our expectations to. And for what it's worth, how am I supposed to have expectations that I'm supposed to be better at something that I've never done? And for me, every day is the day that I haven't done, because I haven't been sober for 13 years and how many ever days. I probably should have counted that before I got here to tell you, but expectations, right? So, but yeah, so that was the same guy that told me to practice don'ting. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, don't. Stop doing that. Don't. And I'm like, oh, that's a clever little thought. There's a lot of different slogans and stuff that we use in AA, and I'm just going to share a few of them from me that work. I've heard people call them cliches. That seems to have some negativeness to me, because these are designs for living that work. These are easy things that you can draw to your head when you need to. One of them is the letters HOW, how I get sober. That's honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. So for me, that's a circle for me, because if I can be honest, I am capable of being open-minded, and if I'm open-minded, I can certainly find my way to some willingness. But you can start that in any spot in that process, and it gives you the other things. So one of the things that I got getting here is integrity. I tell my kids all the time, it's a family thing for us. Integrity. Integrity is the only thing that matters. If I've got my word, nothing else matters. And I'm going to tell you a quick little story about my daughter. So my daughter is now 25 years old and just graduated from the ASU with honors. I got to be in her life since she's been 12. And one day she had this dilemma that she had with her boyfriend. And she had kissed another boy. So we're sitting in my truck, and tears are coming down her face, and she goes, "I'm sorry I've let you down." And I was like, Jesus, I don't feel that way. I go, "What are you going to do?" And she looks at me and goes, "What? What do you mean, what am I going to do? You've been telling me for 12 years integrity's the only thing that matters, and now you're curious if I'm going to not tell this guy?" And I'm like, I've never been so ashamed of myself and proud of my daughter in just the life that I have lived. I have lived a life that has allowed me to teach other people that honesty and integrity matter. And I will tell you that was awesome. A couple of other things. One is you cannot be too stupid to get AA. It is a simple program. It is not easy. It's simple. But I have, however, watched a whole bunch of people be way too smart. So don't overthink it. Keep it simple, stupid. My dad always says they took that phrase out of AA because people don't like being called stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. So another one is that you can have a drunken horse thief and you take away the alcohol, you still got a horse thief. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm a horse thief. I lied, cheated, and stole for a long time. I don't do that anymore. But I got to do that at a day at a time, and that starts with that integrity and honesty I spoke about. You have to conduct yourself as if. Conduct yourself as the person that you want to be. Eventually, it'll be the person that you are. I can promise you that. I always said 13 years, 20 what? 29 years, 30 days, less than 30 days. Right on. Same distance from the ditch. We pick up, our lives are fucked. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you do that tomorrow, you do that tomorrow, or I do that right now. My life is over, as I know it. And I'm telling you, jails, institutions, and death. That's where it ends every time. You know how many of you guys that I've seen go out and die? The longer you're sober, the more dead people you see. It sucks. And I'm telling you, I know a bunch of guys that are serving some serious prison time, and they were great guys, and I thought they had it. But one day they let their guard down. That disease that's out in the hallway doing push-ups came and got them. And their life is forever changed. And I would hate to see that happen to anybody, but don't kid yourself. You're not special. I'm not special. Jails, institutions, and death. So one of the other things that I've learned is that the answers come in the seeking. So for me, finding a higher power that worked for me, I always said my higher power swears, has a great sense of humor. My God is one of my boys. I had lots of theology growing up. I was raised in the church, but I never had a connection with that God. That didn't work for me at all. But I got here, and I found a God. What's that statement? God led me to AA, and AA led me to God. That's a thing for me, man, because I didn't have one before I got here. And now I got here, and I got one that's good. He works for me. It's not always the plan. Actually, most of the time, it's not the plan I expect. A lot of times, it's the one I want. A lot of times, it's the one I didn't know I wanted. So that's a big deal. I will tell you, it's God's plan, and it's none of your business. That's one of my favorite ones. And one of the ones that I'll give you this one free of charge because it's the best one I've ever used myself. When I've heard this, somebody else told me this. I use the acronym for FEAR, that is forgetting everything is all right. So for me, that works, and this is why. Because if I can get myself centered, if I can get myself right in my right now, I'll be okay. Because if you take a good cleansing breath and realize you're forgetting that everything's okay, because right in this moment, it's okay. So I don't know what's going on in any of your guys' life, but I can promise you right in this moment, right this second, you're fine. You're safe. You're comfortable. You're happy. You may have a bunch of bullshit that you got going on in your head, but you're okay. So I'm just telling you, it works. If you can give yourself that calming breath and get yourself centered, it'll do your body good. Because fear is all about stuff that hasn't happened yet. And shame and guilt is all about shit that already happened. So if you can get rid of those two things and get in your now, you'll be good. I've said it takes action and more action, and sobriety first. I always tell my lovely wife, she's the second best thing that's ever happened to me. Because without this, I don't get that. Without this, I don't get a good job, which I have. I don't get my house, my cars, my kids, my family. I don't have any of that stuff. Anything I put in front of my sobriety, I'm going to lose. Don't kid yourself. Again, you're not unique. That's how that works. So I am going to close with the idea that, look, I'm not exactly sure why God chose me to recover. I'm just so grateful that he did. And I'm telling you, by being here tonight, you guys have no idea, for preparing for this and going through my story multiple times, I feel fresh. I got such a refresher in my sobriety. I love you guys. I'm so glad you're here, and you're so glad that you've let me share my story with you. Like I said, I love you. I'm Sean. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. Thank you, brother. Really, thank you so much. I'm in trouble?
Thanks, Sean. That was a great story. Let's thank Sean one more time.